This is great. We'll just start chatting. Hey, everybody, welcome to the inaugural Poesophy Substack Live. Never done this before. Happy to be here. I've got with me Jake Favor of the Relational Frontier. Jake, how you doing?
I'm doing very good. Thanks for having me, Aaron.
Yeah. You have sort of branded yourself with this concept of relation. You've got the relational frontier. You work in circling and dialectic and the dialogos. How did you find yourself interested in this relational idea?
Yeah, it's a fun story, particularly because by temperament, I am a pretty introverted person. I like my alone time and being by myself, and I've
Mm.
found myself in a position where my whole life revolves around talking to people now, and I love it. It's amazing, and yeah, I, if I had to pinpoint anything on how I found myself here, I would point to there was a couple of videos that came out during COVID between John Vervaeke from Awakening from the Meaning Crisis fame
Mhm.
and Guy Sangstock, founder of Circling,
Right.
uh, Jordan Hall, who's kind of a tech entrepreneur, but also kind of like futurist thinker.
Sure.
Done a lot of work in like the game B world, and then the last couple of years had a conversion to Christianity. And
Yep.
then Chris Master Pietro, who's a student and colleague and peer of John's, who's just like really eloquent, lovely human being. So, anyways, these four guys got together because they were all doing some kind of dialogical practice. Guy was doing circling, you know, John and Chris are really deep into the Socratic tradition and kind of studying, yeah, what is this dialectic mode of communication. Jordan was doing something where he was talking about finding coherence with people. And they were all talking about a similar kind of phenomena of how do we essentially go deep, but not just in some, I think we can talk about going deep and whenever anyone says something that we don't say in normal conversation, but they were pointing to a specific thing that it had a kind of ontological property. It's like speaking in a way that is addressing the meta crisis, the meaning crisis, deep problems of philosophy, really. How can we use our experience to not just be in our head and figure things out, but actually experientially access deeper levels of the world? And so
Right.
these guys came together to try to do that. And there's these videos, you can find them to type up Dialogos 1, and there's like 4 or 5 of them. They're on Guy's channel. And yeah, I was just a guy during COVID sitting on his laptop watching YouTube videos all day during COVID, not much else to do. And something about those videos scratched something in me, scratched something that I had just been itching for. Like it was the closest thing I'd experienced. It was the closest thing I'd experienced sober to deep mystical states I've had on psychedelics.
Yeah.
And that was something that I was really chasing at the time. And so I started following them a lot more. I started doing circling with Guy. As soon as I did a Dialogos weekend, I did that. And I've just kind of thrown myself into this world ever since.
So the dialogues that you saw online led you to check out Guy Senstock, and that entered you into the program that he offers.
Yes, yes. And that's the art of circling training.
Right. Yeah. Are you like some sort of like certified circling coach or something? Is there like some sort of ordination process or like education
Yes, an ordained
school or
circler,
something?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, so through the art of circling training, at the end of it, they give you the option to get certified, which is where you submit a recorded circle. And and so I'm a certified circling facilitator, and I also coach for the subsequent art of circling trainings. Um, and then yeah, and then me and some friends that also did that host live events here in Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, so you're helping them out as they help other people learn the art of circling. You're helping coach in that facility as well as in your relational frontier work.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and there's because yeah, there's the circling training, and then there's the kind of facilitator training, which is not just learning how to circle, but how to teach circling. And yeah, so I've been doing that for a couple of years now. And one of the things I think about as I'm talking about this is a lot of people have had experience with something like circling, perhaps even called circling. Um, and I think it'd be fair to say, a couple different lineages of circling. So it was
Okay.
officially, in its current form, founded by Guy Sangstock and some others in about 1998. Um, and founded is a funny word. It's like, this is the thing in some respect humans have been doing as long as there's been humans, sitting around the
Right.
fire and finding finding some truth with each other.
Mhm.
But I would say that the current form of it was founded by them in the kind of California Bay Area in the 90s, and have been kind of slowly evolving over the last 25 years.
Yeah.
And in that spreading is, there's circling Europe, now known as something else I can't remember, connection something. I'll find it. And
No worries.
the Integral Institute. So if people are familiar with Ken Wilber's work and integral theory, in Boulder for a long time they had the Integral Institute, and they were doing a kind of circling. And then also there's just kind of a lot of what I will call kind of rogue circling groups, where people have done some circling and went and started their own thing. And so there's a lot of discussion around what exactly circling is. And some forms of it are more free form, where it's just people sit down and show up and get present and talk. And we do some of that at the Circling Institute, but also there is a facilitated form, where it's one person kind of the focus of the circle, and as a facilitator, you're holding the room, you're holding the space. And yeah, then there's also other related things like authentic relating, which are more games, like where you're using prompts and kind of dyad exercises to get in deep flow in other ways. And yeah, and there's a whole kind of ecology and ecosystem of these dialogical kinds of practices. And part of the idea for me in starting the relational frontier is really seeing this phenomena that, as a human species, we are trying to find new ways to relate, not just in connection with each other one on one, but that's a big part of it, and I kind of think it all builds from there. But all the way from that up to society levels, like how do we organize as a people?
Mhm.
And playing on this old meme that I saw that was, born too early to explore the stars, born too late to explore the earth, born just in time to make dank memes. It's a meme I saw a couple years ago that I was kind of riffing on, because I think we were born just in time to explore this edge of relationality, this edge of what does it mean to be a person connected to another person, connected to the earth, connected to the world, and how can we do that, and how do we explore new ways to do that? And I think things like circling, things like John's dialectic into dialogos, things like Warm Data Labs with Nora Bateson. There's all sorts of interesting things people are doing to play with how we can meet each other and hold different kinds of containers that facilitate different kinds of interactions. And so part of my idea with the relational frontier was to have a space to bring people together that are interested in this, and kind of offer a palette of different
Yeah.
things that people can try.
I like that idea of a container. I was doing a little bit of looking around this morning, and I was looking at the etymology of the word relate, relatio, and the common sort of idea of feeling connected to or sympathetic with other people is actually a pretty recent development in the meaning of that word, like from the 1950s, and like advent of like modern mainstream psychology. But really, like a deeper meaning is to come again, to hold again, because to
Mm,
relatio means to bring or to bear, and so relatio means to bring it back and to bear, and it sounds like from what you're talking about, like how your entrance occurred, um, with this like explosion of consciousness surrounding like the meaning crisis, maybe you had like some sort of like existential call into this practice. Am I warm?
I would say so. You could definitely call it an existential call.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I mean, yeah, I think I'm very much a man of my time in as much as I'm a, kind of in between Zoomer and millennial guy
Hmm.
that at the time of finding all of this, just playing video games and smoking weed and not really sure what I want to do with my life, not really a sense
Uh-huh.
of direction. And so
Sure.
that was a little existential crisis on its own. And and at some point along the way, I, for various reasons, realized that I think I might need to start taking my life seriously.
Right.
And and at the beginning, it was about music. So I'm also a musician and spent a long time doing that as kind of my core. Yeah, that's what really felt like the existential call to me. And it was really it's really fascinating how that's weaved into this because,
Hmm.
for a long time, music was such a core part of my identity and who I was. And
Right.
I could see it as strange as, I still play a little bit, but it's not as nearly central to my life now. And I
Yeah.
could imagine that feeling bad in a way as that kind of recedes and I start going into this other thing. But the reason it didn't occur that way is there's something very musical about these relational spaces. There's something very akin to being in a good jam, you know?
Right.
One
Right.
guy lays down the bass line, the drummer's going, the guitar solo starts riffing, and everyone starts moving off of each other, and you're listening, and the group field is cohering to where something happens between us that's more than any one of us could have done by ourselves. And that's the thing that I love about music is playing with other people and feeling that co-emergent space and that that itch that drew me so much into that. I found in a way that was remarkable because it was at a certain level accessible with everyone. There, there's a possibility in deepening your ability to listen, to deepening where you're sharing from, that you can invite
Mhm.
basically any person into a kind of jam in that way. And so the musical mind and the sensibilities of that space ported over really well into the relational space. And I can really see the through line of my existential calling as something of doing that, how to bring people together in something of a dance, how to participate in that co-shaping, co-listening movement. And as I, was kind of figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, the more that became clear to me that that's what I've been chasing, that sense of group flow. It was just obvious. Whatever I'm doing has to has to have to do with that in some way.
Yeah, and it seems to me like for every participant in a musical discourse, it's sort of like, you've been at a party where everybody starts talking and eventually a couple of people start disagreeing on an idea and they just end up having to see who can shout louder to like make their point or whatever. When to have an actual cohesive interplay that's like deeply meaningful and sensible and reasonable, it it requires that every participant sort of recognize who they are and what their limitations are, what their desires and motives are, and to be like comfortable in that, in the shared space where other people are also comfortable with that for themselves. And then
Mhm,
it can like start to emerge into a music that like actually just like sounds good and has that play that you're talking about, as opposed to like clearly the lead guitar player has done these licks like a million times and really just wants to own the stage kind of thing, which is a very boring performance, right, for
mhm.
everybody.
Yeah, no, perfect analogy. That's exactly the case. And as it relates to these ideas of like the meaning crisis or the meta crisis and just the general feeling of, polarity and tension in our world, one thing that is continually made abundantly clear to me is the the level of discourse that is required to grapple with the things we're grappling with as a society, as a culture,
Mhm.
are not. I was actually just talking to someone about this last night, and we were using the language of the institutions of public discourse that we have for in America, let's say, for example, are founded, especially in America, on this kind of like white Anglo-Saxon Protestant kind of this is the culture that the founding fathers were in. And we had a sense of, there was some sense of religious diversity, but for the most part, that was, within the many denominations of Protestantism,
Mhm.
and so there was a sense of, okay, yes, this is how we should try to work things out. We debate and have different perspectives, and we try to come to some higher order understanding, and through doing that, we'll get better ideas, and it'll evolve, and it'll be great. We're gonna kick ass. And but what I don't think that system is prepared for is um, discourse between worlds,
Mm,
between wholly different mythic structures of what the kind of
mm.
core axioms of your ontology, of your metaphysics, of your experience of being
Right.
is, and and the kind of the language of debate, of rational discourse, starts to fall away because when we're not operating on the same ground, if we have the same axioms, we can disagree and kind of work out, okay, if we start here, what conclusion follows down the line from that? And maybe we have some disagreements, but we're kind of playing the same game. But if the core mythic backbone of our understanding of the world are different, that mode does not is not going to do anything. It's just going to lead
Right.
to, yeah, fighting and shouting who's louder, as you said, trying to play the louder guitar solo. And so it's become increasingly clear to me that this level of discourse, this level of where I'm not just trying to debate you, I'm not trying to beat you, but I'm also not just merely agreeing with you either. It's
Right.
I am trying to get the world that you're inhabiting. When I'm facilitating and teaching people any of these practices, a phrase that I've been using more and more lately is listen not just for someone's words, but what might their experience be like that has them say those words? What
Mm.
what is the ground of that? Where is that coming from in them? What's important to them that would have them say that the way that they did? So I'm not just gathering information from you that I can kind of process over here. I'm actually listening for what you are, for how the world is unfolding for you, and letting myself step into that, where I'm not kind of over here across from you, but moving towards sitting next to you, and kind of getting the vantage point of where you're
Ah,
looking.
sure.
And yeah, so I say all that just to point to I something like that, the level of questions that we're grappling with in our culture is yeah, like the debate discourse doesn't really touch it because it's things around, like these mythic questions, like what's the relationship between the masculine and the feminine? It's what's I saw a good post from Yoshi the other day where he's like, the core question in our culture is beauty subjective or is it objective? Is and which like is there a core ground of what makes something true and beautiful, or is it culturally dependent? These kinds of questions that go so deep, objective, subjective in general. These
Right.
questions that go so deep, we don't have the tools in the kind of debate format for grappling with them. And something like this deeper kind of relating where I'm listening into you, where I'm willing to step not just into your perspective, but really into your world, into your experience in a really direct way, where I'm not just getting information or ideas about you. I'm actually letting myself get impacted and moved by you.
Yeah. And you were talking about the nature of the central public discourse um, being built on one framework, but now there are multiple frameworks at play. It's no longer just three networks. Now it's the whole of the interwebs. I was thinking, you were talking about trying to sit beside the person rather than sit in front of them, facing them, so that you could see from their perspective or their vantage. And I was thinking part of that boils down to vocabulary. Like you mentioned the words you used, and why would you choose those words having something to do with what you're experiencing as a person and some vantage that you're coming from that would give you the sense to need to use such words. But then also, there is like a whole strata of vocabulary that everyone from our little factional like side groups are coming into the center with all sorts of names for the divine, all sorts of ways of talking about gender, all sorts of ways of thinking about race and power, and just like vocabularies can change dramatically from person to person. How do you think about vocabulary in your experience working with circling? Is that an issue? Has that come up?
Hmm. Interestingly, not in so direct a way, partially because the mode of listening that we're engaging in is one that's really willing to ask questions. And a big tool of deeply listening to someone is paraphrasing and checking for accuracy.
Right.
I heard you say this, and this is how I'm understanding it. Did I get that right?
Mhm.
And and that move seems to actually be really smoothing over of a lot of the vocabulary differences. And and even, having a space where it's really open to share whatever comes up. Maybe someone uses the word from, let's say, um, the race camp, and they start to, like, the kind of race and power language, and they start talking about power structures and the systemic oppression and these kinds of language. And that has a certain ideological bent to it. That had I can There's a lot of these kind of code words in culture where it's like, oh, if someone uses this, I can kind of approximate at least some of your worldview. And
Right.
and another person might feel like, oh, they might notice they like get maybe they had a lot of online debates on Reddit comment sections, or like watched a lot of videos of owning the libs, or whatever your thing is. I might notice I
Mhm.
get like activated hearing some of that language.
Mhm.
And I could potentially share that. I could potentially also listen for, because this is one of the things I love about the art of circling, particularly, is that it's very centered on the present moment and on your experience. And one of the things we talk about a lot in circling is, okay, how do we bring this down to your experience? Like,
Mhm.
yes, we're talking about systemic oppression, which, sure, okay. What is that in your life? What have you experienced in your unfolding of your days? And then that brings it to like, oh yeah, like here's, whether it's the way I didn't get a job for this, or whether it's I didn't get this, and whatever you want to point to. But that's the beauty of bringing it down to the experience, is there actually at the experiential language level, we have almost entirely shared language. I mean, the language is mostly, when you really get to the core of it, it's like of sensations and feelings. And
Mhm.
that's and I can I hadn't put it this way before, but you can almost think about it like a coding language. Like you can have, Java or Python or, C, and all these different coding languages. But when you start to bring it down to the baseline, it's just ones and zeros. And at that, they kind
Mhm.
of all have the shared vocabulary. And so, we might have all of our different perspectives and worldviews that we have different language at. But when I start to inquire into what is the experience behind it, the language actually starts to, there's only so many words to describe the sensations and feelings that you have come up, and there's only so many um, words to point to what it's I mean, when we start to really get down to it, there's this core human experience beyond and under our character traits, our personalities, our perspectives, our everything else. There's this core kernel that's being a person, having an experience, kind of going through life and getting tossed around by fate and getting shaped by that experience. That that is what we are and what we have. And if I listen for that in a person, I can always find some way that we're the same, even if the most radically different person. This core quality of just being in existence and having a world occur, this kind of fundamental ground of our phenomenology, that is deeply the same. And speaking of words, like there's not a ton of words that can really get at that because it is this mystical place. And so I think there's room for play, especially with coming into exploring, like, yeah, what do you mean by that? Help me understand what you're pointing to with this. And doing a lot of these bridging questions that help me enter into your vocabulary. It's like when you read a great poem the first time, it's like, I have no idea what this guy is saying. And I kind of have to enter into his world. It's like, oh, you're speaking from this angle in this way. Like I think poetry trains us to listen this way really, really well because it's in many cases it's a poet having a world, having a way of meeting reality, and they've mastered the art of language such that they can invite us into that way. And they say, all right, I'm going to say this. If you try to listen to it from your baseline consciousness, you're not going to know what I'm saying. But if you can
Mhm.
enter into the world that this language comes from, I'll show you vistas that you couldn't have imagined.
Yeah, another thing about reading a poem, which we can do in the era of, you know, easily accessible literature online and after the printing press and these things are affordable. It's so fascinating because you can pick a poem up, and oftentimes, like you said, in that world creation, that type of vantage that that poet is taking, that only that poet can do because it's that particular consciousness that has that access. It can be this very I mean, it depends on the poet, but it can be this very like rarefied or even specialized kind of language, but there's an intimacy to it, like
Mhm.
calming your thoughts and allowing for that poet's words to emerge within your own mind in lieu of your own language is this like deep mysterious intimacy, so that even if it is like just wildly different from the type of language you would otherwise
Mm.
choose, you're intimately familiar with it and even embody it in a very real way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think intimate is exactly the word. Because what does it take to listen to a poem, to read a poem in that way? It takes a kind of porousness. If
Mm,
I'm kind of separate from the poem, kind of letting it stay over there and running it through my mind and my intellect, I can maybe understand things about the form. I can kind of get some things about some of the language maybe, but I'm not going to enter into it in that way because I'm
mhm.
keeping it separate. It requires this kind of porousness where I'm actually letting it permeate me. And to speak really symbolically, there's a kind of death. I'm letting the way that I was coming to it die and opening into, like, especially for me, is always a moment when I really get into a poem of not knowing what's going on. Like there's a
Mhm.
moment where I'm digging into a poem and I'm just letting it wash over me, that I for some time I'm like, I don't actually know what's happening right now, but I just wade in that uncertainty until that new world starts to coagulate, that new sense of seeing starts to settle in me. And that's kind of what I'm pointing to with this porousness of listening. And there is something deeply intimate about it. And so just like in a really good conversation, if someone has a really different perspective from me or just a whole different experience from me, there's a moment where I need to it seems to be what it takes to be vulnerable and intimate is bearing with uncertainty. It
Mhm.
is bearing, the most vulnerable thing I can say is the thing that after I say it, I have no idea what's going to happen next, right? Because so much of our communication, we we speak to control the situation. What can I say to
Mm.
get this person to like me? What can I say to have a certain outcome? Or maybe someone comes to us with a problem. What can I say to help fix or give advice? We have all these intentions to control the situation with our language.
Mhm.
But what happens when I communicate with the intention to relate is and to really get intimate with someone is I say the thing that think about the hardest conversations you might have had with their romantic partner. It's like, I'm going to say, I love you, for example, and I don't know what's going to happen after it. And there's going to be a moment where I'm just like paralyzed. Like, you could say you love me too. You could reject me and my whole world's going to crumble. Like a million things could happen. And there can be that kind of vulnerability in listening too, where whether it's a good poem or a person, I'm listening in a way where I'm going to come out the other side of this not the same, and I don't know in what way. And the ability to tolerate that uncertainty, that opening up and not knowing, and being able to bear that not knowing and let yourself get shaped in it is what seems to be the key of entering into that more intimate space. Again, whether it's with a person or with a poem, or I mean, even just with a mountain. I like I this quality seems to transcend a lot of different domains of what does it take to really get moved by something, and it is opening to letting it move you, right? To letting it change
Mhm.
you.
Yeah, another thing, just speaking as a writer, like a lot of what I'm doing when I'm trying to write a poem is I'm listening to something that I'm not sure where it's coming from. And I'm trying to represent what that is as best I can. And that in and of itself involves an uncertainty. And it seems to me like when you're in a situation where you're interacting and interplaying with another person and you're trying to represent what it is that you're experiencing, that vulnerability that you're describing
Mm,
of not knowing what might be the effect of the words I've just chosen on the response of the auditor, the listener, that can be an existential threat, right? Because if I myself don't know if this language is quite sufficient to represent what it is I'm trying to represent, that vulnerability of not knowing how that person's respond could be a even further threat to what it is that I'm trying to be.
yep. Yeah. That
It
what
seems
comes
to
to
me that's where romantic relationships can
Mhm.
become so particularly volatile.
Right, exactly. Because if I share something that deeply matters to me and it doesn't land with you, what's more crushing? What's more
Right.
crushing than that? And, I've had a lot of experiences at, like, retreats or events where it's, you go to these places where you're in the woods for a week and you're with these people and you're having these intense experiences, and on the last day, everyone says the same thing. Be wary of who you share this with. You know,
Ah.
share share the fruits of it for sure. Share what transformation came, share what you got out of it. Share that as much as you can. But in terms of who you talk about the actual experience with, be very mindful of that because to share a deeply meaningful experience and have it not received actually hurts it. Like
Mm.
it is a way that if I have a really profound experience and I try to share it, I think of this comes up a lot around the conversation with mystical experiences. I had this experience that reshaped my entire sense of self and world that transcends any ability to have words. And, for example, you go to someone and you try to tell them about it. And they're like, "Yeah, sounds like you were really high." Whatever, man. And
Yeah.
it one, there's like a grief there. Like I just feel like an ache in my heart even talking about it because there's a sense of it. There is a kind of, I mean, different words I could use like sacrilege. It's almost scandalizing, and so there is an artfulness to vulnerability of learning how to trust because in terms of I've worked with many people who their thing is like, oh, I would love to be more vulnerable, I would love to be able to open up more and have more intimate relationships, but like I'm just locked down, like I don't share that way. And in many cases what it is whether it was a parent, whether it was a friend, whether it's a teacher, whether it's one early experience or many over and over again, some reinforcement from the world that says, oh, when I share these deeper parts of myself, it's not safe. It's not going to be received. And so we close that off. We say, okay, because we recognize we're very intuitive in this way that this kind of central core of me, my soul, my deepest passions, my cares, are sacred in a way. And we want to share that. But we have the experience of trying to bring that deepest cut of ourselves and it not being received. And so that deep kind of intuitive intelligence knows like, oh, that's no good. Like this is
Mhm.
too sacred to have squandered in this way. And so we guard it and we lock it down and we kind of craft a whole identity around not sharing that ever because it's too risky. And in the reinforcement from the world has showed that that's not a good idea, and so I'm not going to do it anymore. And then we have radically divided lives between who we show up as in the social world and what's actually most important to us because it doesn't feel safe to actually let those interact.
So much is coming up for me right now. But I guess the most pertinent and recent thought in response to what you just said is just that this might kind of explain why in the last 25, 50 years, individual one-on-one therapy has become such a thing where it's like you go and once a week, once a month, you pay another person who you don't even really know personally to talk about these like existential things about yourself just so that you can talk to someone about them. And how does this relate? Um, how do you see circling and these dialogical practices and relational practices that you're involved with? How does that relate to this recent phenomenon of one-on-one therapy that we've gotten into?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, definitely a lot of overlap. So we do live events here in Boulder, and then I have my online space, and a lot of therapists come to them. Um, the biggest difference, I would say, and this is particularly what I love about circling, especially, is it can be therapeutic because you are getting to share and have and get seen in that way. But it's explicitly not therapy because it is baked into what we're doing that we're not trying to fix. We're
Mhm,
not diagnosing you. We're not trying to
mhm.
help you. We're not trying to figure anything out. We are literally just for the pure sake of it, just trying to know you, just trying to know you more and share what it's like to know you. I say a lot that the two cores of relating, the two key pieces of it, are sharing my experience and getting curious about your experience. All the rest is built on that. And so how circling relates to therapy is yeah, you show up and you bring yourself. And I hear so often that I've been doing therapy for years and it's helpful, it's good, but this
Mhm,
is different because there
mhm.
isn't a sense that you're trying to fix me, you're trying to change me. And there's in some sense nothing more healing than the experience of me seeing that you're being with me just to be with me. You don't have any motive. You're not trying to get anything from me, which again is where we most often create these guards because most people, their experience of, oh, if someone's trying to get to know me deeper, it's because they're trying to figure me out so they can play me, so they can take advantage of me.
Mm.
And so it's like, you're not trying to get anything from me. You're not trying to help me. Because while a lot of times trying to help comes from a good place, it sends a subtle message that where you are isn't okay.
Right.
And the just getting seen, just being bead with, has this quality of, oh, just me, just how I am right now already is worth pouring your attention into. And having that experience, I mean, it opens worlds. So that's how I would relate the two a little bit. Is there's obviously a lot of overlap because, like you said, that is people pay top dollar to just be listened to, and I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of value in it, and and I think that's coming from a deeply intuitive place of, oh yeah, I need to this part of me that I've kept behind locked doors. Like I'm not going to be whole if I don't actually get to bring this in relationship, because at the end of the day, our sense of identity is shaped by our relationships. Our
Right.
sense of who I am is shaped by how I've been mirrored. How whenever I show up in relationship, other people kind of mirror back to me who I am by how they relate to me, by how they interact, and so my sense of self, my sense of who I am, is shaped by how I show up in relationships. If I never bring that deepest part of myself, guess what's getting left out of my sense of self?
How does this take itself into the quote unquote real world outside of the circle? Like, but what I'm imagining is that as you become more and more skillful and practiced in these types of relations, you can just be a little bit more honest and unguarded in your interactions with people. It's not going to stop you from practicing proper discretion about certain aspects of your life as it makes sense in a social situation. It's not going to cause you to just overshare with everyone or anything like that. Like it seems like, but it seems like what it would likely offer is just like a more of a sense of um, vitality and balance and consistency in your interactions with people just on the whole. Am I right on that? Or
Yeah, if I were to say the three main fruits of having done this for a while, it's, one I named, one of the key pieces of vulnerability is this ability to bear with the unknown, with the uncomfortable, with the uncertainty. And so it's my tolerance for not knowing what's going on in relationship and being in any social situation. Like my tolerance for uncomfortability and like tense moments is just way higher. So I think that's one fruit. And then the next piece of that is like the ability to navigate between the surface and the deepest depths. Because there is a trap, and I've been in it myself, that whenever anyone starts doing these practices, whenever someone starts circling, or, we have this idea of therapy speak. When people go to therapy, they start speaking in this way. And there can be this desire to like, oh, it should always be deep. If we're not being deep and going to the
mm,
core, we're not being authentic. And there
right.
can be this kind of insistence that we need to get to the levels underneath. And that's a phase. I've definitely been in that phase. But where I find myself at now is the agency to navigate all of the levels of depth with the person. And so it's not about how do I always go deep. It's how do I calibrate where is the place for us to be right now. You know,
Aha.
when I meet
Sure.
someone on the street, it's like talking about the weather is a wonderful place to be. It's actually probably the most connective place we can be because it's the thing we're both experiencing right now. Like that's great.
Yeah.
And then, when there's a rupture in relationship, being able to go and be with the uncomfortable underlying thing is hugely important because, this is where relationships fall apart. If something happens and there's a crack in the relationship, and we don't know how to get down to the level of analysis that's happening at, to the level of what rung of the relationship is the rupture at. Is it that we just disagreed on where we wanted to go to dinner tonight, or is it I don't think the way you're choosing to live your life is healthy, you know?
Right.
And and so I think that's one of the biggest things I've got is this ability to feel into, okay, where is the level that's called for us and how do we get there? And finding that. And and then with that, the other thing that I say is the biggest real world fruit of this work is I just never have to have a boring conversation ever again. Like I just never have to be bored in a
Right.
conversation because when you learn, first of all, if you learn how to listen in a way that people feel listened to, you'll be fascinated. People like my one of my
Right.
favorite things is when I was traveling my van, just sitting down at a restaurant or like a diner or a bar or wherever, and just talking to one of the patrons, and you know, it takes maybe two genuinely curious questions before they start telling your life story, and like it's fascinating, and and so there's just this sense of like I never feel like I have to have a boring conversation again because I know how to open up the space where magic happens. I know how to open up that space in a conversation where I can see something about this person that I might not have seen otherwise, and sometimes that no one might have seen otherwise. And
Right.
so that's probably my favorite fruit is just I really enjoy people.
Yeah, I'm certainly not um, educated in the same way that you are with respect to training in circling, but just practicing like mindful listening, like in meditation groups in the shares, the Dharma sharing after a meditation, and a lot of 12-step work I've done, where you have a theme and listen to people share based on that theme about something really real in their life, all uh, sharing the same vulnerability that you're struggling with the same addictive issue. That's gone a long way in the world with just interacting with coworkers, bosses, friends, family, to allow someone to feel seen and heard is just invaluable. It brings in such depth. Um, oh man, I was going to go somewhere with that. Well, I did think a little bit too about what you were talking about showing up. Oh, I just remembered, by the way, so I'll come back to it. But showing up being like sort of attunement, like there's a metaphor you hear about like proper virtue, proper mindfulness being like the string of an instrument. If you wind it too tightly, it will break or it will be sharp. If you if it's too loose, you can't get a
Mm,
good pitch. Um, and finding that balance in whatever situation you're in so that you can have that level of the appropriate intimacy for whatever whoever you're talking to and whatever the context is
mhm.
seems applicable. But that, yeah, so that's what I was going to ask you, was just like you mentioned, just like regular conversations with strangers and like bars and stuff. Like, do you have any stories or examples where that really happened for you?
Mm. Yeah, there's one that comes to mind. It was, it was right after this retreat I was on. It was with Rafe Kelly and the folks at Evolve Move Play in Washington. They do really cool stuff where it's kind of like a nature parkour retreat. And and me and one of the guys from that were hanging out afterwards, and I think we were just like walking along a beach or something. We were hanging out, and I don't remember how we got in this interaction, but this woman kind of was around and started talking to us. And at first, it very much could have seemed like one of these interactions. Like I think a lot of us have had experience, especially like living in like an apartment building or something, when like some neighbor, like you're standing outside and like starts talking to you, and it's like, oh, like hello, and then they like keep going, and you're like, oh, they're gonna keep going, and I'm not sure I'm interested in this,
I've
and
got a
it's like
coworker like
okay, and
that. Yeah.
now speaking of what different intentions we can have with our language, it's like now I'm using language to figure out how to get out of this, and and so that's one thing that can happen. But I remember, and she was talking about I don't even know, like an appointment she had or something. And And she's going on about it, and it's like, okay, whatever you're saying right now, I'm not too interested in. But what I can tell is as you're talking, it seems to really matter to you. Like that you say this right now seems like you really care about whatever you're saying right now. But I don't get why. Like actually, I don't care at all. But
Right.
can I let's see if I can understand what is important about this for you. And so I kind of when I had a little gap when she had to take a breath, I was like, yeah, seems like yeah that you make this appointment like has a lot of stakes, like something really matters about this. And she goes, yeah, yeah. And she opened up into her whole story about, like some of her history with like dealing with her physical health and the way that's impacted her relationships and her work. And and then I got to start asking about some of these relationships, and she got to tell me about her husband who had passed, and she got to tell me about her her job that she had been in for a long time that she lost because she like physically couldn't do it anymore. And I got to hear about that and how meaningful a time in her life that was. And I got to just get all of the richness of this person that just a few minutes ago was like kind of just like annoying and blathering on about like some random thing that I didn't care about. And it took so little just to like scratch behind it just a little bit to actually get like her humanity. And as I'm telling this right now, I'm realizing that I don't remember a ton of the details because the content of what she said actually wasn't what stuck with me, but it was the feeling of it. There was such I I remember like there was a sense that she felt a little confused when I first started asking these deeper questions. Like she's like, "What?" Like it was almost like, "Oh, like people can ask like that's the thing that people can ask." Like it not even like occurred that someone might want to know what's important about this to her. And so I remember like at first there was a sense of confusion, but as she kind of started to sense like, oh, this guy actually wants to understand me. Like you're not doing any like you're just actually trying to get me more. And I could feel it. Like I could feel her start to relax. I could feel myself start to relax. And as she started getting into talking about like these deeper experiences she had, it just felt so like there's this feeling that like just moves me so deeply. It's like this deep sense of human camaraderie. Like, oh, here we are together, like knowing each other. And and I could just feel the way that oh my god, I'm like getting a little choked up talking about it. I could feel the way that getting to share this aspect of her life and getting to get understood in this way. I didn't ask her this directly because I'm like, I don't know if I could do like a full, hour and a half conversation with you right now, but I wanted to go a little bit deeper. And I had the sense it's like, oh, you've like maybe never got to talk about this with anyone, not in this way. Maybe people know these facts about you. They know that you work this job. They know you have your husband. They know these injuries happen. They know these facts about you. They don't get like what it means to you. And you know, a lot of this is like getting into the body. Like, how does it feel talking about this with me right now? And it might be like some movement like butterflies in the stomach, or I'd be like my heart feels full, or even I'm choked up. And and getting to meet her there and getting to feel that that's what it meant for her, that even just for these like extra 15 minutes that I talked to her that we didn't have to, what it meant that someone gave a shit enough about her to spend the time to dig a little deeper, to dig behind. um yeah, that feeling just sits with me, like it just sits like a glow in my heart. And and there's a way that I just love that space so much. Be I love getting to be with people there because the only real way to be with someone else at that level is to listen from that place in myself. And nothing reliably gets me into my heart, into the deeper rungs of my own being than listening to someone else in theirs.
Yeah, it's just I don't have a coherent thought in response to that, just that I kept thinking of empathy and compassion, the sharing of suffering, like how integral it is to the fullness of being human, and how we're like that woman and so many people I know. I come from a working class town, where people are talking at and they'll be really frustrated and might start shouting, you know, when it's what uh, that energy that's causing like it to manifest as anger and turmoil is really it's a frustration that I don't know how to present this in a way that I can convey to you to understand how I feel about it, and I think about like experiences with my dad. My dad's one of these very um, uh, man of few words, very stoic in the kind of pejorative sense, and if you come to him with an emotion you're having, he'll kind of be like, oh, well, don't worry about that. And he thinks he's trying to assuage you. He's trying to give this like paternal care and allow you to not feel the tension, but he's actually inadvertently and unintentionally invalidating the emotion itself, which does the opposite of that relief that you can get in that moment you shared with that woman, and cause that this re- kind of rebellion in me. like I get a real case of the fuck yous when when it happens to me, and I just hear that so much in daily speech, people not being able to get into that space where we can just be in this together and we're all suffering. Everybody's suffering in a different way. And how can we recognize that and like come to it so that we can be, helpful and assistive? And well, big word for me is love, right? But I really like love in the classical sense of to will the good of the other,
Mm,
whether or not you like them, or whether or not you feel like warm and emotionally fuzzy around them, like you just will that for them to be good, to do well. Um, I don't know. That was a very big ramble,
mm,
or not a ramble so much as a jumbled response.
yeah. Well, I can pick up a little bit on what you're talking about with your dad because, yeah, I mean that's the most common thing in the world. It's like, oh, you got a hard emotion. It's like, let me get rid of that for you. Like that sounds like trouble. Let me let me help you
Yeah,
get rid of that. Let's sweep that
right.
out. And and again, it makes sense. It's like, oh, you're in distress. I'm getting that this doesn't feel good for you. Let me have it not be that way anymore. And
Right.
and it can often come from good intentions. But yeah, what we don't get in that is maybe I'll start from here. There's something we talk about in circling called warrior. And what can happen a lot when you're starting to like, ask these deeper questions and get to a deeper layer with somebody, especially someone maybe like your dad or someone even less stalwart, but even still a kind of guard, is that when we start getting to their deeper experience of their hurts, of the places where they grieve or where they feel discontent, people can have a tendency to rescue their listener. Be
Mm,
like, yeah, I did say it hurts, but it's not that bad. Like, really, don't worry about it. We'll do this thing where I try to let you know that it's okay and you don't got to do anything. And and warrior is this aspect of circling where it's like, oh wait a second, I'm noticing a dissonance here. Like just a moment ago, you said it's like it felt like your world was falling apart, and then you told me that it's okay and like everything's fine. What's going on there? Can you help me understand? um, and and then usually if they're being honest with themselves, they'll open. It's like, oh well, like yeah, it's hard, but like it's not your responsibility to deal with. Like, I don't want to put that on you. I mean, I'll do that. We're like, especially in the West, we have this thing where it's like, I'm me and I'm over here, and I don't want to put my stuff on you. Maybe I'll do it with the therapist because I'm paying them, but no, I'm not putting that on you. And it takes a kind of have you seen Good Will Hunting?
Oh, a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, there's that famous scene where Robin Williams with Will there with Matt Damon, and Matt Damon's talking about his dad who abused him, and and Robin Williams goes, "It's not your fault," and Will goes, "Yeah, I know," and he goes, "No, it's not your fault." He's like, "Yeah, I know." He starts getting closer to him. It's not your fault. And Will's like, "Hey man, like fuck off! Like what are you doing?" And his defenses start getting up a little bit, and Robin Williams just persists and he stays there, and it's essentially him saying, and he keeps going until not your fault, and eventually Will breaks down and starts crying, and what that was is Robin Williams being basically like a bulwark. Like I'm staying right here. I'm staying with you. I want to be with you in that hard thing. We're not going to make it go away. We're not going to pretend it's not here, but you don't have to be alone in it. And I'm going to stand right next to you, even, and you're going to have things come up that are like, don't you fucking do like, don't, no, you're not.
Yeah.
And it's like, and there is a certain level for boundaries. It's like, no, like, I don't want you invading my world. There's that. But then there's the other one that's like, no, I actually really, really want somebody here with me, but all of my defenses are telling me like I shouldn't. Like I shouldn't put that on someone else. It's not safe to show this vulnerability. But how and there's a real delicate art of learning to of holding that space of you don't have to be in this alone. And it's that difference between, oh, it seems like you're suffering, let me help you get out of it, versus it
Right.
seems like you're suffering, let me get in there with you and hold it with you.
It's kind of a crass analogy, but it's sort of like with strength training. You have to figure out what it is about your body that's not able to do whatever it is that you're trying to do, and you have to put stress on it consistently in a managed way to allow it to be able to develop the resilience that it needs to thrive in that pattern, to then have its the kind of autonomy and independence that you're trying to aspire toward. Seems like the psyche, it's something like that with the psyche.
Yeah, and again, this is what did you say the etymology for relation was earlier?
It's to bring or to bear back, to bring something to bear again.
Yeah, yep, yeah. That bringing to bear, and that's where we get this word relation. I mean, when you mention the strength training, it is so deeply that you know so kind of in the frame I was given earlier, we have our little ego identity structures that kind of hold us together, and there's certain aspects of our experience that we don't let be a part of that because it's
Mm.
not safe to bring that out. And so in a way, getting in touch with that requires letting that structure down a little bit, letting the mask, letting the persona, letting the sense of identity, letting that fall away a little bit to open up to this thing that I didn't include in that. But the thing about that is horrifying. That is
Right.
everything that I think that I am and that orients my life and how the world works. I'm going to let that unfurl a little bit. And it's like, why the fuck would I do that? Like that's a nightmare. But this space where someone is deeply with you, it's like it's almost like I'm holding that on your behalf. And
Uh,
I'm yeah, I get that that's holding the world together for you. How about this? How about I'll be here and I'll be steady and I'll hold the world together. And you have this time to not have to hold the world together for a little bit.
aha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that vulnerability is like a very high cost, high risk state in in the world, because uh, how we cohere our identities and senses of selves in relation to others is, it can be torn apart and thrown to the ground if we offer that vulnerability in an unwise way in irrelevant environments or
Mhm.
inappropriate environments. But to be able to throw it all away or let it all break open in controlled environments where we've established circles of trust, rapport. Um, at the beginning of a circling session, you bring up that, hey, this is going to be like, as they say in 12 step, what you what you hear here, what you see here, let it stay here, here, they say at the beginning, a little bit confidentiality disclosure kind of thing. We create this space, we have this setting where we've mutually agreed upon these conditions for the proper kind of communications to be able to transpire. And then, yeah, you can have that vulnerability, and it's not a threat to your uh, sense of self or your cohesion as a self. Uh, and the more you do that, I would imagine, I mean, I've done it a couple of times, but I would imagine the more you do that routinely and develop a practice of it, the more you can just kind of be consistent and content with and comfortable with yourself in everyday situations, not being afraid of the possibility of vulnerability like you maybe used to or something.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's this one thing that's reminding you, it's like over and over again, this experience. Because it's funny, you say, "Yeah, in the safe container, it's not a threat to your identity." It's like, well, actually, it still is, but in a way that I come I let the guards fall. I step into the space of the unknown. I share the thing that I don't know what's gonna happen after I say it. And and there's like this like a huge weight, like my body like tenses, or I feel a heaviness in my chest, or my stomach is churning, and it's hard. And then we sit with that, and then we sit with that, and then at some point it kind of relaxes a little bit, and you kind of look around the room and you're like, oh, like I survived. Like I did that thing that my whole constitution told me that if I ever shared that, if I ever spoke from this place, if I ever showed up in this way,
Yeah.
fucking everything would break. Like the world would fall apart. And I did it. And hey, look at it. Like it's actually, not only am I not dead, I actually feel pretty good. and and it's just having that experience over and over of shedding that story that this is this is what's gonna break me, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much they do this with everything in their life every time, but in 12 step culture, they have this phenomenon of like story meetings or like speaker meetings
Mhm.
where someone will tell their story, which is really kind of like a story that's sort of essentialized to the main components that relate to their addiction and recovery from the addiction. And I've had the privilege of hearing certain speakers do this more than once. So I've heard the story told in multiple settings by the same person. And it, it's interesting to see what slightly changes and what remains consistent. But it is fascinating to me and relates to what you're saying. Oftentimes in these recountings, a person will disclose something that in any other circumstance they would just simply not go around talking about, like something that they did or something that happened as a result of their substance use that was like damaging or harmful, but just, yeah, you hear, it's a crazy phenomenon to hear, like, here's the person and they're interacting before the meeting, and then the meeting, and then they go up and they tell their story and they say these things that, like, even imagining myself doing that is threatening to me, right? But they've done it multiple times, and then yeah, like they might. They oftentimes are the outside of that story when they're around mingling with people after the meeting. They're like some of the most soundly composed and like resilient people you'll ever meet, and often the most joyful.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, and what do you think that is? Like, what is it about sharing from that place when you say they seem sound, resilient, and joyful?
Well, I think part of it's what we've been just talking about, like the practice of living with the sites of discomfort that would otherwise be like incredibly deconstructive. Just the practice and habit of doing that repeatedly over time gives that memory less power, less destructive power, because you lived with it, you carried it, you have encountered that fear and vulnerability inherent in sharing it. But then also, it's couched in the culture of mutual recovery. So you know that by doing this thing, I'm assisting other people who might be able to benefit from uh, following in this path of living a new way of life, a new, more virtuous way of life, you know, with the principles of the program, and
Mm,
calling to them to to see the opportunity to also feel new comfort and composure in your own vulnerability, and that shared. I don't know. There's some. I don't know if you call that culture, if you call that the Holy Spirit, or what you call that, but um,
mm, yeah. Yeah, that reminded me of something that I came up to me to say earlier, and it's I think this is something we've talked about before also, because yeah, we've mentioned 12 step a lot, and like the difference between something like 12 step and something like circling,
uh-huh.
because I think the cool thing and the power of 12 step is this idea that I'm going to share, and like people aren't going to, judge me, and they're not going to try to fix me, and they're not going to give me their stuff back. Like I just get to share. I just get to get this out, which is like such a gift. And the difference that I've talked to a number of people that have done a lot of 12 step and then went to circling. Um, and the difference is the feedback, right? It's
Mm,
like I share my experience, and then I get to hear how it impacted you. And
hmm.
I imagine in 12 step, a lot of times that might come afterwards. Like someone shares a story, and then maybe after it's over, it's like, hey man, that really like helped me, and it was nice to hear that. But there's something in circling where we get to in the moment,
In
like,
the moment, right?
yeah, I share this this thing, the thing that I'm certain that if I share, everyone's gonna go away and abandon me and hate me. That thing, whatever that is. We each have one or many, and I share that, and my whole little predictive processing model that's trying to anticipate the world is like certain that okay, you guys are all gonna walk out of the room now. No one wants to talk to me anymore, and then we get to hear it's like, how did that land? And
Mm,
someone might share like, yeah, I just am feeling like deeply softened, and you know I'm noticing the places that I resonate with this and that I feel connected to, even just hearing you share it. And we get, talk about rewriting the script. Like I share from the place in me that I'm certain no one wants to see. And then I get the feedback that people are deeply moved and feel more connected with me than they
mm,
ever have after
mm,
I shared it. And that can be hard to take in. It's like that
sure.
like goes against again my whole model of how I think things are gonna go. And the other thing I'll maybe emphasize is the difference between kind of sharing story and sharing experience. And there is overlap for sure,
Sure.
because in there's certain versions of circling that try to get away from story, like it's like just focus on the present moment. But the way I practice it, it's not that we don't bring story, but we bring that outside context to understand more what this current moment exists in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm getting some of your story, but I'm also getting how, like, what I really want to know is how is the world occurring to you right now?
Mm.
And again, when we think of vulnerability, like that's actually the thing that's really vulnerable to get disclosed. Like,
Right.
especially when I tell an embarrassing story about myself, of something I did that I'm ashamed of or that was destructive. Because yes, I'm retelling, like I'm relaying the details of what happened, but what's implied is like the world was occurring to me in a certain way that had me act that way. And when we start to talk about like self, like who I am, it is this kind of self-world connection. The way I experience myself and the way I experience the world are related. And to let you see, like, yeah, this is how the world occurs to me, is to reveal, in some ways, like the most intimate thing to me. I'm letting you in on that way in which I am related to the world, in which I experience the unfolding of being. And 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 then again, getting to hear that feedback of when you get this about me, what comes up? How do you feel? What moves you? And and again, it's funny because again, it's not there because I'm not trying to help or fix you or get you to feel better. I'm just getting you and then sharing what it's like being me as I get you. And I kind of bridge this into the whole idea of the relational frontier and the kind of stuff that I've been writing about is that I said early on in this that we get our sense of self is shaped by our relationships. All the different people in my life shape how I am, how I show up, how I experience the world. And and we are all at every moment to one degree or another participating in the co-shaping of our worlds and selves. We're doing it right now. You and I
Mm-hmm.
are to some degree or another
Yep.
shaping each other's worlds and sense of self. And the closer we get to these deeper grounds of really sharing that level, the more we're doing that. And so going all the way kind of back to our conversation about like the political and division and culture war and all of that, and how the modality of debate doesn't really touch that. The mode of debating and kind of trying to figure out who's right, like the level of questions that we're grappling with as a culture just don't you
Right.
can't touch them with that mode. But this mode of and yeah, you can't touch them because we're operating from if we're operating from different worlds, no amount of logical deduction is going to get us to meet because our kind of core sense of how the world is opening up to us is different. So this other way of meeting both in getting each other's worlds, but also co-shaping each other's worlds.
Mm-hmm.
That is where we actually have the opportunity to meet at that deepest level of humanity, where we have this just shared reality of existing and being in the world and getting shaped by life and tossed around by fate. That thing that we all share, when we meet each other there, we get to participate in co-shaping and not me shaping you or because you shaping me and who can win
Mm-hmm.
in world shaping. That's where we get into like magic and like black magic and stuff. um but the vulnerable one where I'm actually opening into love and opening myself to being receptive to you and getting impacted by you and getting changed by you and developing that trust and rapport and that sense of camaraderie of we're in this together at the deepest level. I a rough paraphrase from a recent post of mine called "All Those We've Gone Down the Road With."
Uh,
I said something along the lines of you know, you and me, we did the person thing together. We were co-shaping each other's worlds such that we experienced life in a new way. You and I did that, and that's fucking rad. That's awesome. And I just want to remember that and savor that and be grateful for that. And that's the place that, you know, we kind of are all taking different bets on how to navigate our way through whatever weird moment of existential something or other we're happening is happening in our world right now. And that space of that deep humanly camaraderie of participating in that co-shaping, that is what I'm staking my that's where I'm putting my bet on the one of the essential pieces of getting through the meaning crisis and the meta crisis and all of that is some ability to do that with each other. Certainly wouldn't hurt at the very least.
Amen. That's a really good place, I think, to bring this dialogue to a close. I just want to express my gratitude for you taking your time and for sharing this experience with me.
Yeah, I gratitude received and reciprocated. I really appreciate the way that you got to yeah, just got to crack me open on this. I, if you can't tell, love talking about this stuff almost as much as I love doing it. um and yeah, it's so fascinating to me that this thing, you know, we're all out here looking for reenchantment or different kinds of mysticisms, and how much mysticism there is in this thing that we've done all the time, which is
Yeah,
just be here and be with people. And in
amen.
some ways, there's nothing more mystical that we can do. And so I appreciate you stepping into that with me and giving me a space to talk about that a little bit.
Brilliant, brilliant. Uh, you mentioned your relational frontier. Do you want to tell people where they can find your work?
Yes. So here on Substack, I write the Relational Frontier Substack, and that's where I write about all of these ideas about relationship, but also about identity. And one piece that we didn't get into as much today is the imaginal,
Ah,
about how our relationship with the imagination and the imaginal um, shapes both our world and our identity. And this is kind of where we get into a lot of your work around poetry and poesophy, and
mhm.
and so yeah, so I read about all of that kind of stuff, and a little bit of relational ontology business. And then if you are interested in practicing any of the stuff I've talked about, either the circling, and we talked a little bit also about the dialectic and dialogos, which is the of Socratic philosophical way of bringing this relational depth to philosophical questions. I do both of those on my school page, also called the Relational Frontier, and you can find that. It's linked at the bottom of all of my posts, or if you just go to community.relationalfrontier.com, you can get to it that way. And on there, I do weekly calls every Wednesday night of alternating between circling and dialogos. And I have some resources on there to talk a little bit about that, and discussion boards where people can share just experience they have practicing this in their life, or all sorts of stuff like that. And hopefully more to come. I have the idea for some whether closed cohorts for people that want to go deeper with this, or and I guess another thing I'll plug is the Circling Institute, which is where I trained in circling. And I think I see another Aaron in the chat currently, actually in the art of circling training. And yeah, I could not recommend them enough. They do every Thursday night. They have drop-in circling nights, and then
Oh,
they
good to
have
know.
weekend workshops, and then the year-long training that I did as well. So if you're interested in any of that, you go check those out. And if you have any questions or just want to talk about this, I am always very, very down to talk. So if anyone watches this and just is curious to hear more about this and wants to talk about it, send me a DM. I would love to. And also, I do either private circling or relational coaching, which is basically bringing this into, yeah, whether it's circling and getting this experience of being seen, or um, training and practicing how to bring these relational skills into your life, into your relationships. So again, if anyone's interested in that, any of these things, I like talking to people. I might have mentioned that somewhere along the course here. So feel free to reach out and make it happen.
You're a friendly guy. I can verifiably attest. That all sounds magnificent. A lot of resources there. And maybe we'll have to come back for another dialogue on the imaginal. I could see that happening on the Poesophy platform. So, Jake, good to talk to you, man. I will be in touch with you. Look forward to chatting again soon.
Cool. Me too. Thank you, Aaron.
All right, peace.